Hi everyone, Vian from Mountain Road here, and I have got a special review for you today. This, the 3T Explorer gravel bike, this being the Pro GRX model. I'm going to walk you through all the various aspects of this bike today. We'll talk about the frame, we'll talk about the components and what you can find fitted to this bike, and then right at the end I'll mix it in with some real life performances of what you can expect. I'm going to put this bike through its paces and take it over some mixed surfaces, some road riding, some trails, some gravel, and you can see for yourself exactly how this bike performs over all those various surfaces that you can ride on. So let's get into the bike and walk you through some of the components fitted to the 3T Explorer. For the bike itself, let's start with the frame. What an incredible design. The more you dig into this design of the frame, the more you'll realize all the engineering brilliance that went into this. Let's start with one of the major design features on this bike. 3T claims this to be the world's first full aero gravel bike, and sure does a good job at doing exactly that. Once you start digging into the frame design, you'll find what they call the Exploro design. So the down tube here being a little oversized, and essentially what this means is that as the wind flows off the front wheel, it kind of catches onto this down tube, and then instead of being in the full airfoil, they sort of squared it off at the top to make it obviously a smaller surface area. That gives it just an excellent aerodynamic design. Along with this Exploro design, you'll find the Exploro kind of applied to other parts of the frame as well. You'll find it in this seat post that is a part of the frame, also squared off at the back. You'll find it in other parts of the frame here in the head tube, and also here at the back where the saddle connects in with the frame. Aero design all the way through, even in the front fork here being much more flattened out to give you that really good airflow across the bike. Aero benefits in gravel racing is sort of a bit of a controversial topic, and I think some people are still deciding whether or not to get on board with aero in gravel racing. But as from a design standpoint, what an excellent job that they did on this particular bike. Moving on into the components. So as I mentioned before, this being the 3T Explorer Pro GRX model. So this one sits fairly low down in that product lineup for 3T, and you might have seen some other reviews out there on the internet that cover the higher end models, both the limited or maybe one of the 3T team editions. This one sits sort of second to last in that product lineup, the Pro GRX model, meaning that it is fitted with Shimano's latest gravel group set, the GRX group set. So let's walk through that, and you can see that they've kind of used a bit of a mixture of components in setting up this bike. Up front at the shift levers, you will find the RX 600 shift levers. For the rear derailleur, you'll find the RX 812. And then instead of opting to go for the GRX crankset at the front, they actually decided to make use of the Praxis Alba crankset that you'll find fitted to the front side of the bike. Obviously this one is running a 1x system, so you will find no front derailleur, so hence no GRX group set over there. And then at the back you will find a cassette that is the 1142 cassette in this case, and that being Shimano's CS7000 cassette. So that gives you a nice range up front with this Praxis Alba crankset. The standard crankset that you'll find fitted to the bike comes with a 42 tooth chainring in the front, so that in combination with your 1142 at the back, gives you a nice little range. It's going to depend on the type of terrain that you ride on and the surfaces that you're going to encounter, and obviously the inclines specifically, whether that 42-42, in other words that 1-to-1 combination in the rear, is going to be sufficient for you. I'll put it to the test later on in the video, and you can see me on some of my steeper inclines to see how that 1-to-1 ratio actually performs on some of the steeper gradients. Alright, so that being the group set that you'll find fitted to this bike. One last thing on that, and that will sort of bring me to the wheels. As part of the GRX group set, you'll also find that the brake calipers fitted to this bike, that is the RX 400 GRX brakes. Then over to the wheels. The wheels fitted to this bike is the Fulcrum 7 racing wheels. Decent wheels, coming in a little heavy. I think, you know, for those real weight weenies out there who want to have their bikes as light as possible, this wheel set weighs in at about 1800 grams for the pair, so not super heavy, but also not the lightest wheel set out there. Alright, as for the tires fitted to the wheels, you would have seen that I have actually swapped out the original stock tires that came with the bike. Fitted to the original bike was the WTB 37mm Riddler tires. I have since swapped them out for the WTB 40mm Nano tires, so just giving me a little bit more traction on some of the trails around in this area. I've also then since converted over to a tubeless system, so when you get the bike originally you'll find tubes fitted within the tires. This has now been converted over to a tubeless system as well. Up front on some of the components for the handlebars, you will find that this is fitted with the 3T Pro handlebar. Now this is kind of an important part, I think, for those of you looking to add on clip-on aero bars. Again, clip-on aero bars is a bit of a controversial topic right now in the gravel scene, or whether or not to race with those. It's only on the Pro handlebars that you will be able to fit on clip-on aero bars. On both the team and the limited edition ones, those handlebars are actually not designed to accommodate clip-on aero bars. So make sure you look into that detail when considering the difference between the various 3T Explorer models. And then just to wrap things up on some of the last components, on my handlebars I actually decided to opt for a double grip tape. It just gives me a little bit more shock absorption when going over some rougher trails. And then at the back we have this very nice WTB SL8 saddle. I've really been enjoying this saddle. Nice little mountain bike flair that it gives to the bike, and something that otherwise looks very much like a road bike and has a lot of road bike performance features built into it. So in this next section, let's go over into my experience with this bike and talk about how it's actually been performing on some of the trails that I've been riding, and what my key takeaways are with some of the components fitted to this bike. I'll start with the frame. What a brilliant design. Just all around the frame has been super impressive. I think that Aero design really comes to light in all the various different applications that I've put it through. So my type of riding, I mostly cover a lot of tarmac roads to head out into either gravel roads, or then also into this beautiful park that you see behind me, where I find a few more technical trails that I can ride on with this gravel bike. And throughout all those applications I can really see the Aero design come into play, especially on those tarmac sections where I can fly down some hills at speeds much quicker than you can with, say, a mountain bike, or even just, you know, as an equivalent to some road bike performances that I've had on those same hills. Alright, so coming over to the end of the frame here and looking at the seat tube design, what I particularly like about this seat tube is that you'll find the rail inserts here at the top comes with a very interesting design. It's like two interlocking spline rings that slide into each other, and that basically allows you to isolate both the seat angle adjustment and also the seat back and forth adjustment. And I've kind of played around with this. In the beginning it's kind of hard to get your head around how this works, because those two spline rings offer different degrees of adjustability, one being 10 degrees, one being 9.5 degrees. In other words, that allows you to make 0.5 degree changes at a time. And once you get your head around that, it actually is quite a handy, nice little design to dial in your seat positioning very well. So I've really appreciated that part of the frame design. Going over to some of the other components on the bike, I have had frustrations with some of the Shimano components specifically on this bike. So since this is the Pro GRX model, let's talk about some of those components fitted to this bike. I think twofold. The one-by system that this bike runs, it's still to be determined in my mind. I do find that the gear ratio, at least for my application, works fairly well. The 42-11 and the 42-42 combinations I can pretty much get away with on any of my regular rides. I don't feel like I spin out on some of the downhills. I don't feel like I need additional gears on some of the steep inclines. However, what I will say with a one-by design, what you inherently get with that is a bit of cross-chaining. I think anybody coming from a 2x6 setup will realize that, you know, we were always told never to run the smallest cog with the smallest cog or the large cog with the largest cog, and inevitably that sort of cross-chaining effect does come into play of a one-by system, and I've really felt that inefficiencies in this drivetrain ever since the first spin of the crank. Whether that's something that's going to bug you, that's up to your own personal preference. For me, that sort of just like extra grinding, extra little bit of noise in the drive system is always reminding me that there's an inefficiency in the chain and it's not quite running at its optimal capacity. So that, not necessarily a negative mark towards the Shimano GRX group set, but just maybe one-by setups in general. So one little annoyance that I definitely had with this GRX group set comes in the form of the RX 400 brake calipers fitted to this bike. I've had my fair share of annoyances with that, especially with the front brake caliper. A couple of brake rubs that I've had to deal with almost on a consistent basis. I think for me it's a case of just having the system perhaps rebled, also checking out the front caliper alignment, maybe even the front brake rotor, but definitely not so far the greatest experience in terms of the brake calipers on this particular model. Alright, so let's move over to the last part of the bike that I want to discuss, and that is the wheel set that comes with this. This Fulcrum 7 racing wheel set that I've got fitted to this bike is actually my second pair that I've got on this bike. Now, I don't want to blame anybody in this process, but when I first got the bike after the first ride, I discovered a nasty little dent in the rear wheel, to the extent where the rear wheel was thrown out of balance quite substantially. So whether that was a shipment, whether that was 3T, whether this was the bike store or even myself on that first ride, I don't know where to put that blame. What I will say is I was very impressed with the way both the bike store and then also Fulcrum dealt with this issue, and they've been very nice to supply me with a second wheel set, and that's what you find fitted to this bike. In general, the wheel set, it's had some mixed performance for me. It's a little heavy, as I pointed out earlier, so not the lightest wheel set that you'll find for gravel racing specifically, and then beside that also not the most stable wheel set. I've taken it on some of the heavier, more technical trails around the area, and I always find that it loses a bit of its balance after heavy use, and at the same time when you are really pushing the watts out of the saddle, climbing and heavily pulling on the handlebars, you do find that there's just that little bit of flex that you don't really want in a wheel set. So all around, a bit of a mixed experience of this wheel set. My experience is that for training wheels, these are just brilliant and you can get away with just about all the use cases that you want, but maybe for racing you would want to consider a higher end carbon wheel set that will lighten the load and just give you a little bit more stability in those fast moving races. Alright, so technical spec sheet details aside, my personal experiences aside, let's take this bike out for a ride next, and you can see exactly how this bike performs over various surfaces. I'll throw in some tar, I'll throw in some gravel, I'll throw in some trails, so you can see exactly how this bike performs and make up your mind for yourself as to if this could be the right fit for you. The Exploro is fast. On this downhill section, I easily reach 30 miles per hour. This is a section where I think gravel just really opened up for me. As I turned off of the tarmac onto the gravel road, I was really bracing for a bumpy ride, but it was just phenomenal at how well this Exploro was able to just smooth out the ride and allow me to continue on riding over the rougher surface. Hand placement on the handlebar is truly key. Without the flare, your hands really need to add that stability when you go into the drops. The front end does bounce around a little bit. It's when you go from the tarmac over into the actual trails that you really just see the benefit of this bike. Easily transitioning over from a road surface onto the gravel section is what makes gravel biking just so epic. I love how I can just do that. It's truly amazing how with these bikes the front end can just really absorb a lot of those shocks. Here you can see the wheel in action as it easily glides over some of the rougher surfaces and just still maintains a smooth and yet comfortable ride. The Gravel Plus design of this bike just allows it to go over so many different surfaces. It really has so much versatility and where you can ride, but I felt like it's when you're on these easier gravel sections like the crushed limestone that you see right now where it just truly shines. It's the aero benefit and all the other features just come together to provide for just an epic experience. I really love this part of my ride. This shot will give you a good indication of how the bike handles, both in the front end and in the rear. Some bouncing around over rougher surfaces, but for the most part, pretty stable over those loose gravel sections. I've got a couple of nasty inclines on the road that I ride on, and you can see it here in this shot as this climb winds it way up. I have to really go through a wide range of gears. This is one of the sections where I think you'll find me hit that 42-42, that 1-to-1 combination quite frequently on this extended hill climb. If something like this is what you ride on, you'll be set. If anything steeper, you might have to opt for an easier gear. The Aero design just shines, even on gravel. I wanted to give you a sense of how this bike climbs. This is not necessarily a gravel section, still super steep. I hit a 30% incline on this particular climb. Any mountain biker watching this video will probably look at this and say, well, that's not a trail. Where are all the big rocks and the drop-offs and all the massive routes that I've got to navigate? That's not gravel bike terrain. This being one of the fairly more hidden trails that I ride on, I think I just still feel so at home on this trail, navigating the occasional mud puddle, having to go by branches, loose leaves, some rocky sections. The bike still just maintains a smooth and comfortable ride. I think for me, this really shows the versatility of this bike and how gravel riding can just go over so many different types of surfaces. Everybody has their own opinion of gravel and it means different things to different people, but here you can just get a sense of how the bike has just evolved to allow you to go over so many varying terrains. All in all, the 3T Explorer is just an absolute joy to ride. Sure, it has its shortcomings, but in the end, the overall package is fast, it's zippy, and an incredible ride. Alright, there you have it. You've seen this bike in action, you've got my initial impressions on how this bike performs, and you've seen all the various components fitted to this 3T Explorer, this being the Pro GRX model. I hope it helps you a little bit in making your decision about maybe a potential future purchase for a gravel bike. Be sure to keep on checking out this channel. Lots more gravel content that's going to be coming to Mountain Road Ride, and if you like this content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. Until next time, this is Vian from Mountain Road. Enjoy that ride.